Hello, 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 hello. We're a little early, actually. We're here at the IDO office in San Francisco. So we'll be waiting for one more minute until we get started and allow the not the early birds to just enjoy the show that David is going to be putting together today, but everyone else too. All right. So no sound? Yes, sound. Hello, hello everybody. Hello Martin. Hello Pablo Parcelo. Hello Haley Temple. All right. So now we can start. So thank you, David, for your time. I mean, I've been a fan of you for a while. I mean, you were a mentor of us 4 years ago. 4 years ago, we were a startup in residence, and we lived and worked here in this office, beautiful by the Embarcadero. And again, Dave was always thoughtful on how to better develop a product, go to market, and so forth. So thank you for that. And again, we stole some of that DNA from IDO and all the little rituals and the way that they story tell. It's all amazing. And I'm happy to see that IDO is packaging all of that magic into little boxes, different products that David runs, like IDOU, like IO Engine, changing to something else soon, and then this creative difference, right? Creative difference, which is like a tool, a system that should trigger change. Right?
Yeah.
So David is here to tell us about that. We'll be doing some live tweeting with some of the slides. David will share. We're recording this, so you can share this with the rest of the organization later on. And also, we'll be opening up for Q&A around 30 minutes into the presentation. But I want David to share the stories that they've collected because they're great. And then again, I'll be probably staring to the side because that's my computer, and I'll be seeing all your questions and answers, all the chat, and so forth. So with that, I'll shut up for a while, and I'll let David Aiken run the show.
Great. Well, thanks for the intro. So yeah, as Mariano mentioned, we have been doing some interesting things at IDEO lately. I will, for those of you who don't know IDEO, I'll just do a quick share on that. We're originally a design and innovation firm going back almost 40 years. We're having our 40th birthday pretty soon. Known for a lot of iconic designs, starting with the first commercial mouse for Apple way back in the day. Now we work a lot with startups, large organizations, developing new products, services, experiences, brands, and the like. It's about 15 years ago now, actually, where we started getting well beyond just designing, but also helping organizations drive change on their own. So being able to adapt to the future, respond to their market, and be less of a victim of change, but rather kind of harness change and make sure that they can stay relevant for the long term. And we've done that as a growing part of our business for the last 15 years. And IDEO's purpose has always been to have impact through design. And about 4 or 5 years ago, our CEO, Tim Brown, he added a word to that, and he said, actually, we're going to have disproportionate impact through design. And that was really a challenge to the organization to say, well, we've got all this expertise and we're always delivering it through people and consulting. And that's really powerful. It has, you're able to just use this sort of bespoke approach and really get into the details with leaders and CEOs of organizations and help them adapt. But there's a lot of things where boots on the ground aren't always the best way to scale. And that we have a lot of these expertise, and we wanted to put these in the hands of more people, of cash-strapped startups, of nonprofits, of small family businesses, big family businesses. And that meant getting beyond consulting, and it meant putting some of these things into different packages. And one of the first of those, as Mariano mentioned, was IDOU, basically doing online learning with some degree of human engagement to help people learn essential skills related to innovation.
And you can go to idou.com to check it out.
Yep. And once we had tried a few of these, we really started thinking, okay, well, let's create a product group to really think about how do we enable leaders to build creative organizations or innovative organizations, and then how do we support those teams to do innovative work. And so we went back to square one, and we're just like, okay, we have a number of different ideas of what we could do, and in IDEO fashion, we decided to prototype it. So we made sort of paper mock-ups of various products and services that we thought might be helpful to leaders, and we started sharing them with those and getting their feedback. And from an early stage, this early pre-product version of Creative Difference became really successful. And that prototype was really about helping leaders understand where they lie and where their strengths and weaknesses or improvement areas are in relation to driving change and innovating, and to help them uncover their blind spots in terms of what's really happening on the ground and how that is either helping them adapt or making them less adaptable and more rigid. And this was really exciting to pretty much all of the leaders that we talked to, because a lot of them know that they need to improve. They know that there's something they need to do. They read these books on innovation and the like. It can be pretty overwhelming. There's a lot of different aspects, from collaboration, prototyping, looking out and talking to customers, all of these things. And they one of two things usually happens. One is they spread themselves too thin. They're trying too much at the same time, and they don't actually get traction in any one place. Or they get kind of paralyzed by the decision choice, and they kind of don't do anything, and the status quo pervades. And so it also made a lot of sense for us, where we've been advocating for a lot of these methods. Some call it, design thinking, a lot of different versions of it, but basically principles that we have seen work time and time again to help teams be creative and innovative. And we're like, well, let's start to get the data behind this and see, hey, if we're right, and if the data can show that we're right. And then let's also create a learning engine where we can start to see what all these different teams do, from those who are new to it and don't really know what they're doing yet, to some of the most innovative companies out there, the Googles, Facebooks of the world and the like. And let's look at those differences and see what actions actually move the needle. And so we took, the dozens of factors that we advocate for. We looked at academic research and interviews, and interviewed leaders of all types of companies. And we started to list out these factors that people accredit to being able to drive change. And then we started to test it. So we started to gather that data across organizations and look at the numbers and say, well, what causes organizations to be more effective? And
I'm getting anxious. Show me.
Well, essentially, we identified dozens of factors that significantly move the needle, and we synthesized them into yes, thank you. 6 creative qualities, sequenced in an order that makes sense. We're going to go through these and describe them so they're not just these mysterious icons on a page. But really quickly, the first is purpose. The second is looking out with that eye-shaped icon there. The third is experimentation. The next is collaboration. The fifth one is empowerment. And the last one is refinement. So I'll leave those moderately mysterious for now and kind of get into
That's part of the beautiful storytelling.
This is the unveiling through this talk, yes. So the first creative quality is purpose, and it's an extremely important one. It's also first for a reason, because it sets the scope and direction for an organization. It's really understanding why an organization exists beyond making money. It represents the change that an organization exists to make in the world. There's an amazing Drucker quote I love, which is, I'm going to kind of ruin it a little bit here, but it's like, profit is an indicator of your success as an organization. It's not the reason the organization exists. And purpose is incredibly important because it helps you understand what to do and what not to do, and it helps foster a portfolio of innovation that is cohesive and means something to employees, and it means something to the market.
Yeah. Definitely, and it's easy for to select who to hire also if they're aligned to that mission.
Yeah, the alignment of employees' personal purpose with organizational purpose is absolutely incredibly important. There's really 3 factors we look at here. One is clarity. So do people actually understand it? Is everyone kind of on the same page? The second is usefulness. So can people use it to make decisions? Is it encouraged to use the purpose to make decisions? Because that will quickly kind of ruin that direction if it's like, oh, this is our purpose, but we're going to do a bunch of other things that don't meet the purpose.
Say what you do and do what you say.
Exactly, yeah. And finally, passion. Like, does it actually get people fired up to bring their best selves to work? The thing with like purpose statements too is they're not always that sexy or interesting, or they don't necessarily seem like look that great on paper. But we use often like Southwest Airlines as our an example to really illustrate strong purpose. And hopefully I get this exactly right, but their purpose is to connect people what matters to them through friendly air travel. And it's, I mean, it could be meaningful. It also sounds like a pretty typical like mission statement or something that could easily lack meaning. But the difference with Southwest is they actually live and breathe it. They incorporate it into their training. So from day one, you know, people are learning what it means to act on the job in pursuit of that purpose. And it's baked into their metrics as an organization. So the story I love about Southwest that I think really illustrates that is that their call centers, their primary and support centers overall, are based around a primary metric of customer satisfaction and happiness. So while most are oriented around like speed of resolving an issue or how quickly can they, how few touches can they have to resolve an issue, which are important, theirs are that people leave these calls satisfied and happy. And so when these metrics kind of start building into the systems and the DNA of the organization, it takes on real meaning. And this is how they're able to kind of build a consistent brand and have the sort of passionate customers and employee base that they do. So I'm going to share a stat with each of these. And these are just sort of some of the low-hanging fruit, like some of the easier things that organizations can do. And one thing that we can never advise leaders enough is really repeat and be really clear about what your purpose is. People, like a lot of leaders feel like they can just announce it, you know, once a year, or it's in the annual report, or we came up with a new one, so it's going to go out in a memo. Like this has to come through consistently, it has to come through all the time, it has to be repeated through actions. And when leaders actually foster that strong purpose and consistent intent and people know what it is, the success rates of those teams go up by 20%.
And also celebrating the actions or the behaviors that are aligned to
Absolutely, yeah, it's telling the stories that emphasize alignment with that purpose. And I'll pause quickly here to just explain our success rates metrics, as this is going to come up quite a bit through our other stats here. We looked at teams and the data that they have across projects in Creative Difference, across our Creative Difference customers, about 500 different teams and organizations to date, and basically look at their likelihood of having a successful launch of a solution kind of coming out of a project. So there's a couple different cohorts there. One is like market facing, so we're launching a new venture or a new product. Teams who don't have their act together their success rate is around like 3 or 4%, so really high chance of failure. And these percentages basically like move upwards from that percent. And as you see, as they ratchet up, a few simple things will easily give a team a 3 to 5 times chance of actually having that successful outcome. It's getting teams with new ventures and new product launches up to 20-30% success rate, so multiple folds on the effectiveness of those teams.
So start with what?
Exactly. The next one is looking out, and we see this as a huge problem, particularly in really large organizations, is that they really kind of suck attention inwards. There's all these internal processes, in many cases, you know, politics. There's our colleagues' needs that are in our face all the time, and that's a good thing, not putting a negative spin on that. But what it means is that the things that are a little further away, your market, your customers, technologies and other industries, the organization starts to get out of touch with those things. And that really loses the ability to have the right intuition and guidance to make the right decisions and to capitalize on the right opportunities. So we look at a few factors here: market insightfulness, customer insightfulness, and technology insightfulness. I won't do a case for all of these just in the interest of time, but we do see that when teams and organizations are connecting freshly with customers at least once a month and then bringing that insight and those stories into the organization, those teams are 24% more likely to have a successful launch. So moving the needle, and again, this is not a super high bar. This is not, you know, a lot of organizations do this a lot higher frequency and the like, and so it is possible to do even better. But just getting out of the building, more than once a month and sharing those stories will have a big impact on performance. The next creative quality is experimentation. So what we also see is when organizations and teams start to get good at the last one, looking out, they are inspired. Like a lot of ideas start to bubble up. It's like, oh, what if we did this? What if we did that? So like we bring leadership teams out into the field sometimes, and it's like all these ideas start popping up. It's like, what are we going to do? Well, if you do that across an organization too, you're going to have hundreds, thousands of ideas, right? How do you decide? And to do that effectively, you really want to have a healthy experimentation pipeline. Find ways to help people explore those ideas at a sort of early level and get some early data. It may not be purely quantitative at that point, but some sort of validation that those assumptions are correct, and increasingly invest in the ideas that show promise and evidence of that. And so what we really look here is that an organization has a sort of effective sequence of types of experiments. So early on, really quick and dirty ways of testing an idea, getting a pulse on whether the assumptions are correct, down to eventually really high fidelity versions of testing, experiences and products that closely represent what the final solution will be. I'm going to share here a story of actually another startup in residence at IDEO, PillPack, one that we're really proud of, is doing really well right now. It's an online pharmacy, basically delivers prescriptions in packets by time of day. Really helpful to make people stay on prescription, know what pills they're supposed to be taking at what time of day. And we really, we worked together with them from the early days of this being a concept. And to kick off, the founder originally, wanted to do this pretty deep, large market research study, which are great. And we do those when we're further along. We say, hey, we're really early here. Let's get out in the field day 2, day 3 of the project, set up a booth at a mall, and print some materials up with different value propositions, pricing of the product and all, see if we can get people actually to sign up. He actually did have a pharmacy, so typical brick and mortar one, and so we would have been able to satisfy those. Day 2, we actually realized like no one is showing up, and why is that? And so they actually had to get out from the booth and intercept some people, and the outcome really there was like the signage actually didn't communicate they're a pharmacy. So they're like, oh, you're a whiz bang startup, you're in the way, you're just delivering stuff. That doesn't, we don't trust that. So great, day 3 of the project, we actually reprint those materials, be it clear, this is a new type of pharmacy, switch pharmacies, right? More people start to show up, not a lot. Also realizing a mall isn't the best place to be talking about prescriptions. But some other people show up and we start to talk to them. And the people who are really interested were caretakers, not the people who's actually taking the prescription. So we're 3 days in, and those 2 insights of clarity about the pharmacy, and there's a different type of pharmacy, and target caretakers, when you think about it, it makes us, they're the ones standing in line, they're the ones who have to deal with the downsides when people aren't taking their prescriptions. This has held true for their years on, and has been pillars leading to the growth of their marketing strategy. And we probably would have gotten there, but it would have cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars, or tens at least, of research and time for us to get there. And if you think about those like quick, scrappy ways to sort of test your assumptions, you're going to get there a lot faster.
Yeah. And sometimes in software, it's people doing it in Excel, so observing how they hack it,
yep,
or even doing it as a concierge, manual. I mean, pretend there's something software-like, but
yep,
back there's
smoke and mirrors prototype. Oh, yep. Always find the quickest way to do it. So this is one of my favorite stats because it was something we advocated for a long time, and now we have the data behind it. There's a lot of advocacy for like a pure lean startup approach lately, and there's a ton of good things about that, but that kind of linear launch and learn we found is actually not the most effective of just like launch your best guess. Instead, we see that teams that actually test multiple ideas in parallel are 50% more likely to have a successful launch. And there's 2 main reasons for this. One is that essentially a huge part is actually keeping the team's mind nimble to what the solution might be. There's a medical phenomenon called cognitive laziness, not a great term, not one I love, but it causes us to defend anything that is sort of our idea.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not our fault. It's literally how our brains are wired. And so if you aren't exploring multiple ideas, you will get defensive. It is human nature. Second, also, you get a lot worse feedback because people are always going to find something good to say about your one idea, and you're kind of artificially creating a focus and interest on that one idea.
And also, I mean, it's about the problem, not about the idea, right?
100%, yeah.
And so when you say like 5 different ways to solve that problem.
Exactly. Okay. Yep. So the next one is collaboration and being really about effectively working together. And here we look at a few things. We've seen what's effective is to have a sort of a diversity of functions and mindsets on teams. A lot of organizations will kind of build around a certain single type of technical competency, which is important, and they should do that to a large degree. But you also need lots of different types of people to successfully launch and commercialize things. And then we really look at sort of how are those groups working together. We find they work a lot more in a lot more agile, fast, and effective ways when they work in parallel rather than in series. When they do our stat, synchronize daily, and at least keep yourselves updated on that frequency.
And is this at a team level or like an inter-team level and business unit?
Yeah, excellent question. So this is largely on a cross-functional capacity. So across departments, across different groups. So any major innovation initiative, and either of those that aren't as major, they do take those different types of functions. It's design, working with finance, working with engineering, working with legal, and them being able to be like on the same page, able to flag things that don't make sense and adapt to those as a team. When things happen in series, you can end up hitting that giant hurdle, and you're 5 or 6 months in, you've invested hundreds or millions of dollars, and it's like, oh, well, it sounded good from a strategy perspective. We created this great design, engineering can build it, but the business model didn't work. Or, it could be any sequence.
And what is your recommendation here? Like put them together as like a project team for a little period of time and discovery?
In the discovery mode, yeah, it is great to have multidiscipline, like representing the different functions that will matter to that. So when we're doing new ventures, we've got designers, design researchers, business designers. We're including like finance and legal. They may not be on the core team necessarily, but they're in the loop and kind of able to help out and squint at that eventual solution. And that helps bring the right inputs in and help the team introduce important factors early so they can adapt to them. So our second last one is empowerment. And this is something a lot of, hardcore business leaders, like, this seems like the soft stuff. And I mean, we at IDEO and me, myself personally, have advocated for this for a long time, that you've got to let people use their best judgment. The real point of people and the benefit of them is their ability to make decisions. And so many organizations treat people like machines and essentially start to shut off their good judgment. And the impact is massive. I'm consistently, like, even though I've known the importance of this intuitively for a long time, seeing the data is really fascinating because the impact on effectiveness and ability to launch and create good ideas is huge. So factors we look at here are, can people kind of challenge the status quo? Can they bring up new ideas, even if they challenge some of the assumptions of the organization? A lot of the best innovations that happen overall, they are in an extreme opinion of the minority, right? If the whole organization knew that was the right idea, they'd be doing it already. Clarity.
How does this make sense with purpose? Because, for example, I was talking to a group inside a large firm the other day, and they were having this idea to solve a problem around, like, whatever, something else. I would be violating my contract. But they didn't have permission, in a way, from their leadership to go out there and test the thing outside the company. So they were bounded to test inside the company.
Yeah.
And I said, like, well, but there's like a taking care of the brand versus on the flip side being able to innovate. How do people that are doing this well?
Sure. Yeah. That's also highly tied to the experimentation scores, your ability to actually evaluate with customers. There are ways around it, not to be too self-promotional here. I actually have a piece, a Harvard Business Review article I wrote a few years ago called "How to Prototype While Protecting Your Brand" or something along those lines.
Oh, we'll send it as part of the
cool.
of the recap.
Sounds good. Yeah, and there are ways to do that. Like you could launch or test it under a different brand name. There's a number of different ways that you can do that, but it is important to get out there. Other ones will do it through like friends and family networks or other more controlled testing networks. So there's other ways like that can be done.
So how to deal with legal would be another piece for hardware.
Sure.
Something with legal to give you permission to experiment.
Yeah. But also what we look here is, do people understand like how decisions are being made? Do they see the way that if they have an idea that it can move forward? And do they feel like a really important one is if they do their job well, can they have impact? Can they drive change? And those factors are massive on the impact and effectiveness of the team. So a lot of you might know this story already, but I think it's a nice illustrative one. Is a pretty big change that Netflix went through. I think this was probably about 5 years ago. I might have that a bit off, but Netflix was already on a good growth trajectory. They were starting to hire really great people, obviously. They're paying them a lot. They're able to attract great talent. But they realized that they weren't getting massive, they were starting to shut down some of the judgment of those individuals. A lot of the process was becoming highly bureaucratic.
I'm just getting feedback from the audience. Don't hit the table because...
Oh, okay. Thank you. Good one.
Sorry, people.
Sorry about that, yeah. And they were saying, hey, well, we're hiring all these great people with great judgment, but our rate of change and our metrics are not improving as fast as they were. And so they went through this freedom and responsibility movement, which was basically to strip back all of the bureaucracy that they were creating, all these like binders and documents of how to do things. And one I find is illustrative. It's not as attached to some of the core functions, but their expense report policy went from this multi-page document down to a single statement, which was act in Netflix's best interest. And we see this happen all the time. They were able to respond to it quickly, which is that we see these little breakdowns happen in our organization and we don't want them to happen. So instead of telling a story about it or creating a principle of how to do it, we make a rule. And these rules start to stack up. And as the rules and processes become more calcified, people start to check out. They start to say, well, okay, the way to deal with this is by following step A, B, C, D, instead of me actually thinking about what should be done. And that when that happens, we see creativity go way down, and that's what Netflix was seeing. And so they make all these tools available for experimentation. They share best practices, but they don't tell people how to solve every problem. They let them use their judgment, and their PMs and designers and the like are really empowered to sort of explore their own intuition and use the methods that they think are best to solve problems.
Also, there was interesting how, again, the why was around entertainment, the how was, well, they still ship DVDs, but again, they switched to that. It was hard on the market and everything, but again, the why, the purpose was permanent, and now they're in rocket.
Absolutely, yeah. And then here, a basic things teams can do is just creating that environment where people can challenge the status quo and then have some autonomy to move forward with some process and first steps to get going. And a lot of those, this is also, again, tied in later in the sequence of experimentation, because having some way that people can understand of like, okay, I've got an idea, there's a way I can evaluate it without spending a ton of money, without needing, $1 million of investment really helps here. But when teams can do this, those teams are almost 70% more effective. And this is just one of many under empowerment that are incredible, I think, in terms of how much impact they have on team effectiveness. So our final creative quality here is refinement. And what we see, again, as an anti-refinement thing that a lot of organizations do is they feel that there's kind of this upfront creative process, and then there's just sort of this launch implementation, jam it through as quickly as possible. That's not That's not the truth. The reality is that through implementation, there's all types of creative problem solving issues that engineers and others have to deal with. And if those aren't dealt with effectively and creatively and in the greater vision of what's being done, what comes out is not going to be great. It's not going to be elegant, and it's probably not going to find product market fit. And so what we look through here is that organizations can carry through their vision and design principles, sort of the elements that need to be excellent for a solution to be successful, and to make sure that there's time to build and refine and iterate on those as they move through implementation. And even post-launch, and while things are out there, organizations that are great at this, they identify the key factors that influence the important experiential and other factors that matter, and they continue to creatively problem solve against those. So it's not like you put something out and it's static. You identify what's going to be important to your organization's success. It should be probably 3, 4, or 5 things at most, and you focus on those, and you focus on constantly improving them.
And how, do you measure, do you assess something around killing ideas or killing things that are already, if you focus a lot of people on something that's not going to be growing anymore because the DVD business, right? Like, where do you assess?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's some of that in refinement and also a lot in experimentation and the ability to say, like, well, what allows us to say yes and what allows us to say no. Having really clear metrics about that and communicating that back. So that's another thing we see low, particularly a lot of big organizations, is under empowerment, the fairness score. And this is that people see that, decisions are being made in a rational way, in a way that can be understood, and it's not just, the CEO's pet project that gets chosen. Basically, a lot of the time those decisions might be made in a fair way, but if they're not communicated and people don't understand it, they start to distrust the system, and they start to disengage. And so those are all pretty critical things.
Last result, show me.
Well, yeah, so really when teams are able to create space to problem solve during implementation, we get a 25% bump to successful launch rates. And really, when you start to ratchet these up, they build on each other. So, with these sort of basic factors, and when organizations are doing these, and we kind of intentionally chose that these are not like factors that are necessarily represent the most masterful or the most difficult aspects to achieve. They increase the effectiveness of teams by 3 to 5 times. So again, you're going from, a really slim chance of like 3, 4, 5% of succeeding to 15%, 20, 25%, and even higher for organizations who are truly, truly masters of this stuff. So that's our creative quality framework. We've seen it work for across industries, from the for-profit sector and nonprofits. Education. Yep, we've been using it in education, and from small to big teams alike. Startup teams of 4, 5, 6 people up to retail banking business units of thousands of people.
So Dave, you've been amazing at keeping time. We're halfway through, so now it's time for Q&A. You ready?
Awesome. Yes.
So one of the things that I'm paying attention to the Q&A right now, but how do you start? Let's say that you are director of a business unit, or someone that, even a manager, someone that wants to start change. Hey, go ahead, just press play there. How do you start? Because in a way,
let's end on this one.
Chart.
Yeah, there we go.
Inspiring and beautiful colors and icons.
Yeah.
So how do you start? There's a lot to be done. Purpose needs to happen at a unit level, but also it's something from the leadership. Some people here asking, like, what if leadership doesn't necessarily get it?
Yep.
So how do you start? How do you equip a champion, an agent of change to do something?
100%. Yeah. Some organizations get lucky. It's like the CEO's pet project or something. It all comes to top down. That definitely is the minority, though. A lot of the time it gets picked up at different parts of the organization. And we really advocate for, starting small, starting where there's the path of least resistance, and really focus on acting on these things and getting the wins and generating the stories that can be shared inside the organization that this stuff works, and sometimes that's a single team that just wants to work in a different way, and can put some of these practices to use and get some wins and start to tell those stories. What can be nice too is getting cohorts of pockets within an organization where people are of a like mind and want to try working differently, and sharing best practices with each other and starting to build on these as a team. And even we've seen in really big organizations that these sort of little sort of secret societies emerge where they're connected and starting to build these capabilities internally. Yeah, we work with, we do work with big giant corporations doing this like across all their business units at the same time. And sometimes we just start with some small teams who, want to start in their pocket of the organization and concentrate on what they have control over.
This morning I was listening to a podcast and they said you guys use the term scare inspiration, which is like a mixture of making them scare and inspire them. Because in a way, if there's no purpose or the leadership's not paying attention to this and they don't want to change, how do you, either you leave the company, right? Probably not very smart, but maybe an option. But again, how do you shake the floor for them?
Yeah. That's why I hadn't heard that term before. I think certainly I think storytelling is always important around these things. Having a vision for why this is important or why there is urgency around it. And that can be different for different industries. Some industries change faster and some change slower, but they do all change. And there is always eventually going to be a need to adapt and look at that changing market and find your new place in it or to lead it to that next direction. And it is important to sort of paint a picture of what's coming. Looking out helps a lot there. Organizations who do looking out really well, they do all of those three things. So, looking at markets, looking at customers, looking at technology. And they also do it beyond just their market, right? So a lot of the time you can see how things are changing elsewhere, sometimes in faster moving markets, but they are sort of painting a trajectory of how those other markets are going to change as well. And putting those together allows you to paint a picture of the future that is different and that needs to be adapted to. And again, it might be coming fast and it might be coming slow, but it is coming, and every organization does need the ability to adapt in some way.
Cool. And again, something that you can also do is tell us about the tool, because
Sure.
you can use this, take an assessment and then use that as a way to pick your story.
Absolutely, yeah. So it is Creative Difference is based on an assessment. So for small teams, everyone on the teams would participate. It is based on pretty straightforward, objective. There's a few questions that are kind of how do you feel about this or that, but largely they're about processes and methods and sort of the facts of the environment. And we basically are able to take those factors, combine them and score them into creative quality and sub-quality scores, and deliver back the strengths and improvement areas of the organization. We also have a section what we call focus areas, and these put a qualitative lens on the really granular details. And we're able to look at those really specific factors and identify the ones where any particular team can focus on to most move the needle. So that notion I mentioned earlier, focus, we think is really important. It's really to identify a few things depending on the capacity and ability of the team to kind of digest and do those. And it's usually, for a team really focusing on it, probably three, four things. For a company that's really, too busy working on other things, one or two things, and that's still going to have a lot of impact over a 6 to 1 year period. So we're able to raise those up. So it's not like, oh, I'm just reading books on innovation and I got to do all of this stuff tomorrow. But if I do these additional things, I'm going to actually improve my effectiveness as a team as quickly as possible.
So there's multiple studies out there that innovation is one of the top priorities for CEOs these days. So I'm pretty sure that most organizations that people work for either already have the CIO worried or they will have it really soon, right? But again, we talked about like how do we start? Who generally comes to you that can actually do something? So like who
Sure.
Because if you're junior, you need to like convince someone else, but probably not the CEO. Who can catalyze change?
It's really all types of people. I mean, I'd say our most common is someone who's in charge of innovation. So it could be like an innovation lab lead or someone who's, a company's pretty at square one and they're just like, oh, you're in charge of building this. But even that's a minority. We do get CEOs, we get business unit leads, we get product managers, we get human resources leads looking to change the organization and culture. We get also a lot of more leaders of sort of operational functions. So, I'll keep some of the companies confidential, but we've had people who are procurement leads or supply chain leads who traditionally have just been like, okay, we just need to reduce costs and gain efficiencies, and it's all, just by the numbers. But they're being asked to make, supply chains more sustainable, or things that kind of require creative work, and that, it's not just all optimization, but actually creative problem solving can be very useful in internally facing and operational roles. So we're actually getting quite a few of those types of leaders within organizations coming to try to figure out how they can adapt into that type of team organization.
All right, picking. So just I'm gonna grab the. You mentioned like large companies. Can you share a story with education or government? Just like, for the people asking, it's my social good.
Sure. I mean, we have some government, but I think those are confidential clients. On the education space, definitely we started working with a number of different school districts through the Teachers Guild, which is IDEO's network of teachers trying to bring sort of creativity and design thinking to bear on the classroom. And actually, I got to give Intercorp and Nova schools credit, as they were one of our pilot customers. So when this was still, an idea on paper and a paper prototype of the dashboard, this conglomerate in Peru, Intercorp, that we've been working with, they saw this idea and they're like, we need this, we want this, let's go at it. And one of our closest partners there is Innova Schools. It's a pretty amazing school system that's managed to be actually a global leader in practices, helping kids develop in all types of ways, from the standard math and science ability, but also being building their creative problem solving abilities and sort of social and psychological skill set, which is also very important. And they've been amazing because they've come along on this journey and are getting both. They started using it after they've been working with IDEO. Started pretty well from the start, but are continually improving year over year. Their purpose has been on the rise. They're getting amazing at experimentation and empowerment. The experimentation stories, I think, are the coolest, because they've really embodied that, where literally they'll take these sort of schools and actually like play around. They've created environments that are modular and the like, where if they have a new idea, they're able to evaluate that on the fly. And sometimes they're moving faster than we even expect them to be. We'll like have an idea on paper, and the next day or week, someone will come back and say, hey, we tried this out and it seems to be working. So really cool to see that, in education, we've seen some organizations be able to move the needle considerably and put it into practice.
So there's apparently a question by Kyla that's getting popular, and I don't fully understand it, because I say, like, how can you collaborate better without turning it into a meeting culture? Apparently, their meetings are not very good, but I don't know, what's the meeting culture.
That's an excellent question. And there's a huge difference between, our stat was sort of team synchronizing weekly, and a lot of teams do actually do that through meetings, daily. Quick syncs and stand-ups daily can be good. I put that in the meeting category. But really, the more effective teams, when they're doing that, it isn't through meeting environments. It's not like sit at a table and share out what you're doing. It is actually diving in and working on messy, in-progress stuff together. When we're, to model and provide a little bit of tangibility about how we do that at IDEO, when we're early in the problem-solving stage, teams across functions and disciplines are actually working together in the same room 6-7 hours a day. 6-7 hours a day of collaboration, literally like working on things together. That does tend to like taper off as it gets closer to execution. It's like, okay, the industrial designer is going to work on this for 5-6 hours. The interaction designer is going to work on this for 5-6 hours. And we're going to have, there's fewer things that we're having those collaboration sessions in, but those are usually happening every day, where there's like an hour, hour and a half plus of working together on pressing problems and issues, and sort of working on those together. So there's a big difference between share-outs and meetings that are really about more one-way communication or feedback, and those that are actually working sessions together.
So I think that because people are like, okay, how do you do this without being on meetings all day and things like that? Yeah. I think that the problem of having highly effective meetings or having no meetings if needed, can be with empowerment, with a sense of purpose, but also like good meeting design. You can solve for those, right? I think it's more than just like these big trends. Like meeting design is something that we are not great at every single time, and again, having the right goals. So we meet to achieve something, right? We don't meet just to be there. There's a good book on that by an author called Kevin Hoffman in Rosenfeld Media called Meeting Design, and I've been reading it, and they have a few general best practices I think are interesting, and I actually tried to get him to come to one of these webinars and talk a little bit about the kernel of collaboration in a way, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And we waste a lot of time there.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I think meeting design is important. Having an agenda, getting to the point, keeping on topic are absolutely important. And then there is just the issue of too many meetings. So I think, and it's important to like people getting together to work on something. Depends on your definition. We wouldn't call that a meeting. To us, those like collaborative work sessions, that's something different. It is productive and stuff that actually drives content forward. A day of that in the right phase is not a day of meetings in our definition.
And then there's Steelcase calls there's informative meetings, then there's evaluation meetings, something like that, and then generative meetings, which are meetings where we get together to create something. Again, at Mural we focus on those, but informative meetings sometimes are needed because, for example, to insist on the purpose, right? Every other week, all kinds, a story, someone that, but again, the thing is like bad meeting design more than our meeting necessary.
Absolutely.
Collaboration is necessary, you need to meet. All right. Have 10 more minutes, so we can keep on doing for 10 more minutes if you're still there. Cool. Some people dropped off, but we still got like 450 people live. All right. So there's someone asking avoiding burnout. I don't know if you can have a good reply to that one.
Yeah. We do look at cultural aspect. One of our we do look at sort of how energizing or draining the culture is, and then sort of the adjectives that describe it. It shows up as a sub-quality under collaboration called collaboration characteristics. And it's sort of how the soft stuff and the demeanor and the way people are working together is actually coming back into those moments of synchronization and collaboration. And it is, I'm not going to say what the number is because I won't get it exactly right, but it is one of those biggies of like in that 30, 40, 50% range. That when people sort of, their energy drops off and that starts showing up in how they're interacting with each other, that effectiveness does fall off. Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, we don't focus primarily as being an engagement study, although we do generally find that teams who do these things effectively are energized by it. People, I mean, particularly a lot of factors under the empowerment score allows people to kind of put more energy into their work, but then stay personally energized, where that like kind of going at those problems is actually satisfying and energy providing rather than draining.
All right.
But people can only work so many hours, so gotta watch that too.
Oh, I love this one. I love this one. So Kevin Brown. So how do you get non-creatives to creatively collaborate? How do you convince skeptical teams to iterate and not release move until they've tried multiple ideas?
Yep. Yep.
Talking to an IDO, you say that everybody's creative.
Yeah.
We just don't have enough creative confidence.
It is. We do believe that. I mean, and we've seen people come around quite a bit. It's like we, as human beings, we all have quite a bit of capacity to be creative. Some people are less or more open to exploring that side of their abilities.
Well, to remember, I mean, I'm watching my kindergartner, and he can't stop creating stuff and drawing.
Yeah,
he's 5. I mean, we were all 5 at some point.
Yep. There's a few things. I mean, definitely suggest checking out the Creative Confidence book by Tom Kelly. It's a good one if those people are kind of interested in exploring that. But there's a few things that we do. You know, one is the 2 big things I would advocate. One is get them looking. If you can get people kind of out of the building, looking at where your products, services, whatever it is, are hitting the world and the customer, that tends to release this sort of clenching onto the status quo. It opens people's minds to the point that some new ideas and some creativity is useful. And it will likely give them ideas that they'll want to pursue. And so that kind of starts to open the door to creativity. And then this one's a little more of like, you know, using the hammer for it, but for those, you know, generative meetings or, you know, whatever you want, like brainstorms or other types of those, making rules about the actual methods of operating in those meetings are helpful. If you check out our brainstorming rules, which you should be able to find on the IDEO.com website, you know, those are rules which people don't generally associate with creative environments, but they do really help. That it's, we're going for quantity, we're not going for quality at this point. We're going to build on the ideas of others. There's some of these factors we're saying this is how we're acting in this period of time.
Before we said no rules or not, I mean, no rules, but some rules, and then common sense. You talk about kindergarten. Yesterday I was reading like how to not talk to strangers, but the last thing was like, remember, always use common sense or whatever. Again, point being is that common sense sometimes doesn't work for adults. So the thing is that sometimes I recommend to break that glass, in addition to the rules. The rules I think are good for constraints in general, for even like for I call them like the jazz musicians, right? Like you see the IDEO guys and improvising, and they're amazing, and we realize that again, not everybody, we're not, I mean, as savvy as you creating. So for those who are not as savvy, we've seen success in the beginning following templates, following guides, call it like the sheet music. So you start like, but again, with that, like they follow that, and then after a while, they feel more comfortable and can improvise. And I think that some of the things that the detractors of the design thinking process are aiming at. There's like they say like those people are not designers, and I could agree that they're not designers yet, but they are starting to appreciate the art of design and are starting to like be able to talk design and give the power to designers to do something together and bring their perspective and have that like T-shaped.
And this is, I mean, this is a big problem, I would say, with the mental model of the business world in a large way is that there's this notion of like creative and non-creative functions, right? That like as an engineer or operations person, or as a member of a legal team or finance team particularly, it's like, oh, this is not a creative function, right? And even things like, oh, creative accounting, it's like fraudulent or this. And these are all like artificial constructs. Like legal systems, engineering systems, all of these, like those are creative problems to solve. Those can all be better. And internal systems can be better. And when you are designing new ventures and new products, you do need finance and legal to be creative partners in those, to be thinking about how we do things differently. Like how do we explore business models and financial models and the like, so that we're actually matching the pace of the exploration of those factors in with the creative concept. And so we are all in roles where creativity is important. This notion that it's, finger painting or just for, designers is false.
Yeah. What we like to say is that, so before creativity comes imagination, right? And we talk about imagination workers as our target audience and so forth, because again, anybody that is envisioning a new way is an imagination, right? And it starts there. But then maybe the friction comes like taking from that to the actual action, right? Which is creativity. I mean, how do we actually manifest it into something that is visual, tangible, and can be used for that change? And really, lowering that friction is important. But everybody's in the business of changing something. Is creative, is a designer, because that's our definition.
Yeah, and that brings up another really important point, which is organizational creativity is different than individual creativity, right? And organizational creativity needs a lot of different types of people working together, and not everyone needs to be necessarily a great brainstormer or a great great at imagining. They might be playing a support role in that or help implementing it. There are things where they can be supportive or help integrate into that creative process where they're not, for example, someone in finance may need to be critical in their point of view on like this looks or doesn't look like it's working. There can be the tone of which you deliver that, which is not to say like, this is incorrect, this won't have a chance in hell, let's shut it down right now. I mean, there are sometimes cases for that too, but to frame that in a like, oh, here's a challenge I'm seeing, here's another challenge I'm seeing, let's maybe spend some time thinking about how we resolve that. That's a method of, you're still bringing an analytical mindset, but you're also opening to, that more fluid and creative process that needs to happen to solve things.
Something that I always like about IDEO all the little rituals that you have here in the office and how you do that. I think that's something that's like another way of how do you start. Okay, create a ritual that manifests the creativity, either again a workshop or actually doing something and something that manifests that. Actually, there's a course on how to create rituals, right, from IDEO?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So again, we're going to be wrapping up now. So if there's people that are interested in this thing, hold on. How do you get in contact with you? How do you start? How do you start talking about budget? All of the things, because I'm pretty sure that a few of people listening here would like to test your thing out.
Sure. Yeah. Contact us. I'm gonna go exit out of full screen and go to my slide that won't stick. But definitely you can email us. There's more information about Creative Difference here. Our pricing is on the site. We do have some flexibility there for nonprofits and smaller organizations. And we are launching in a month or two a self-service, which will be really helpful for really smaller teams to get started on it. But if you have questions, definitely head to our website, creativedifference.ideo.com or just creativedifference.com, or this shortcut here on the screen. Or just email me and I'll get you in contact with
exactly. And again, all of you will receive this recording soon, so you can share with other people in the company. It takes a movement. You need to start a movement, right?
Exactly.
So get your allies infected with the virus. So again, thanks for joining us today. Thank you, David, for your time. I think that these ideas are evergreen. Right, so thank you for discovering them and packaging them into something that's really remarkable and memorable. Right, it's really easy to remember these six and now you also have the tool. So bye, everybody. Thank you, and stay tuned for more of these conversations. Bye.